The air was thick with the scent of white roses and nervous excitement. Elara, radiant in a gown that shimmered like moonlight on a calm lake, stood at the altar, her heart a drum solo against her ribs. This was it, the culmination of a dream she'd held since she was a little girl, a day she'd meticulously planned down to the last pearl on her veil. Beside her, Liam, his eyes a warm, steady blue, squeezed her hand, a silent promise of forever. He was her anchor, her safe harbor, the man who had effortlessly filled the void she hadn't even realized existed until he walked into her life. Their love story wasn't one for the dramatic chronicles. It was quiet, steady, built on shared laughter over late-night takeouts and comfortable silences under starlit skies. He was a landscape architect, a man who found beauty in order, in the carefully curated natural world. She, a curator at a small but esteemed art gallery, saw beauty in the raw, the untamed, the stories whispered through brushstrokes. Opposites, perhaps, but perfectly complementary. The ancient stone archway of the church, draped with ivy and delicate fairy lights, framed the scene like a forgotten painting. Guests murmured softly, their faces glowing with anticipation. Elara's Aunt Maeve, her only living relative, sat in the front pew, a tiny, silver-haired woman with eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 unspoken stories. Maeve had raised Elara after her parents, a vibrant, artistic couple, had disappeared without a trace when Elara was just 5. The official story was a tragic boating accident, a sudden storm on a remote lake. But a part of Elara, a tiny, insistent whisper in the quiet corners of her mind, had always wondered. There was no wreckage, no bodies, just a lingering, unsettling void. Maeve had always been vague, her grief a heavy cloak she wore silently. Elara had learned not to press, accepting the official narrative, building her life on the solid ground of the present, rather than the shifting sands of the past. Today, that past was supposed to be firmly in the rearview mirror. The organist, a plump, jovial woman with a penchant for overly dramatic flourishes, began the processional. The bridesmaids, a pastel symphony of silk and smiles, glided down the aisle. Then it was Elara's turn. Her father, a figment of memory, was replaced by Liam's older brother, Mark, a gruff but kind man who had offered his arm with a surprising tenderness. Every step was a step towards a future she craved, a future of warmth, family, and uncomplicated happiness. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows cast iridescent pools of color across the worn stone floor, each hue a promise, a blessing. She was almost there. Just a few more steps until she reached Liam, until their hands met, until the vows were exchanged and their lives intertwined forever. That's when it happened. A ripple went through the assembled guests, a subtle disturbance that prickled the hairs on the back of Elara's neck. A tall figure, shrouded in the shadows near the back entrance, began to move forward. He was unlike anyone she knew. His hair, a wild, untamed dark mess, framed a face that was both stark and deeply etched, as if by sorrow or a lifetime of hard-won battles. His eyes, even from that distance, held an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. He wore a simple, dark suit that seemed out of place among the celebratory finery, and there was an undeniable air of a storm about him, a sense of something raw and unpredictable. A murmur began to spread, growing louder, more anxious. People shifted in their seats, craning their necks. Mark tensed beside Elara, his grip on her arm tightening almost imperceptibly. The music, which had swelled with joyous anticipation, seemed to falter, a hesitant note hanging in the air. Elara's gaze, drawn by an invisible thread, remained fixed on the stranger. There was something in his stride, a familiar echo, a ghost of a movement she couldn't quite place. A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of a strange, unsettling recognition. It was as if a forgotten melody had suddenly been plucked from the depths of her memory, a tune both alien and deeply personal. He walked with purpose, his gaze sweeping the room, then settling, with an unnerving precision, directly on Elara. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a stare that seemed to pierce through her veil, through her meticulously crafted facade of composure, right into the vulnerable core of her being. Her breath hitched. Liam, sensing her unease, turned slightly, his brow furrowing as he followed her gaze. The stranger continued his relentless approach, ignoring the growing discomfort in the room, the silent protests from the ushers who tried, weakly, to intercept him. He reached the front row, just feet from Aunt Maeve, who had now risen, her face drained of color, her usually composed features contorted into a mask of pure terror. Her lips moved, forming silent, desperate words. But the stranger paid her no mind. He stepped past her, his eyes still locked on Elara, and then, in a voice that was rough, unyielding, and utterly devoid of any celebratory cheer, he spoke. His words cut through the stunned silence like a serrated knife, echoing off the ancient stone walls, shattering the delicate illusion of the perfect day. "Elara," he said, his voice a low growl, laced with something akin to pain, or perhaps accusation. He paused, letting the name hang in the stunned air, a name that felt both intimately hers and suddenly alien in his mouth. "You don't know me, but I know you." A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Liam took a step forward, his jaw clenched, a protective instinct flaring in his steady blue eyes. The officiant, a kindly old man who looked as if he might faint, fumbled with his Bible. Mark stepped in front of Elara, shielding her slightly, his body language a clear challenge. But the stranger was undeterred. He took another step closer, his eyes still burning into hers. "I'm your brother," he declared, his voice rising, imbued with a chilling certainty. "Your twin brother. And I've come to tell you, your parents didn't die in an accident. They were taken." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The scent of roses suddenly seemed cloying, the sunlight through the stained glass, too bright, too harsh. The dream, the meticulously planned day, the future she had envisioned with Liam, it all fractured in that single, shattering moment. Her brother? A twin she never knew? Her parents taken? It was a story plucked from the most sensational of thrillers, a nightmare suddenly made flesh in the sanctity of her wedding day. Aunt Maeve let out a strangled cry, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that Elara had never seen before. It wasn't just shock on Maeve's face. It was guilt, a profound, gut-wrenching guilt that screamed of a hidden truth. Elara felt a sudden, dizzying lurch, as if the very ground beneath her feet had dissolved. The familiar faces of her guests blurred, the elegant church transforming into a distorted, menacing space. This stranger, this spectral figure who had materialized out of thin air, was not just disrupting her wedding. He was tearing open the very fabric of her carefully constructed reality, exposing a raw, festering wound she hadn't known she carried. He was not a guest. He was an omen, a harbinger of a storm far greater than any she could have imagined. Her perfect day had just become a stage for a terrifying truth. The silence that followed the stranger's chilling declaration was heavier than any sound. It wasn't an absence of noise, but a suffocating presence, a vacuum that sucked the air from the ornate church. Elara stood frozen, the scent of roses now a bitter mockery, the vibrant stained glass light a cruel spotlight on her unraveling. Her gaze, still locked on the man who claimed to be her brother, darted to Aunt Maeve. Maeve, usually a pillar of quiet strength, was a crumpled heap in the pew, her face buried in her hands, soft, broken sobs escaping her. That raw, undisguised grief, laced with something that looked horrifyingly like shame, was more damning than any accusation. It confirmed the stranger's impossible words in a way no theatrical pronouncement ever could. Liam, ever the protective one, was the first to break the spell. His arm, strong and reassuring, wrapped around Elara's waist. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous, a sharp contrast to his usual calm demeanor. "Get out of here. You're disrupting her wedding." The stranger, however, didn't flinch. His eyes, the color of storm-tossed seas, remained fixed on Elara, ignoring Liam completely. "My name is Caleb Vance," he stated, his voice now calmer, but imbued with an unsettling intensity. And I'm not leaving until she knows the truth. The truth about David and Eleanor Vance. Elara's parents. The names, spoken aloud by this spectral figure, felt both sacred and profane. David, her father, with his booming laugh and hands always smudged with paint. Eleanor, her mother, whose gentle hum could soothe any fear. Memories, fleeting and indistinct, flickered at the edges of her mind. A sun-drenched garden, the smell of turpentine, a lullaby whispered in the dark. Could this man truly be connected to them? To her? He's lying, Maeve cried out, her voice raspy, finally lifting her head, her eyes red and swollen. He's a madman, a charlatan. Guards, get him out. A few ushers, pale and bewildered, finally moved, hesitantly approaching Caleb. But he merely held up a hand, a gesture of quiet authority that strangely stopped them in their tracks. He then reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather-bound photo album. His movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, pulling focus back to himself. The world, for Elara, seemed to narrow to this one man, this one moment. He opened the album to a specific page, holding it up, not for the entire congregation but directly for Elara to see. It was an old, faded photograph, the kind taken with an amateur camera. In it, a young woman with a wild cascade of dark curls and a mischievous smile held two infants, one in each arm. Her face, though younger, was unmistakably her mother, Eleanor. And the two babies, their tiny, identical faces, both with the same striking light-colored eyes, sent a jolt through Elara that was more visceral than anything she had ever experienced. One of the babies had a small, distinctive birthmark just above its left eyebrow. The other did not. A mirror image except for that tiny detail. Elara felt her own left eyebrow, where a faint, barely visible birthmark lay, an almost imperceptible imperfection she had always dismissed. The baby in the photo without it. Caleb pointed to the baby without the birthmark. That's me. And this? He said, gently tracing the other infant. This is you, Elara, Eleanor and David's children. Born on September 12, 1990, at St. Jude's Hospital in Boston. The details, so specific, so precise, were like tiny needles pricking through the thick fog of her denial. Boston, St. Jude's, the exact birth date. How could he know? A shiver ran down her spine, colder than any winter wind. Maeve let out another choked cry, collapsing back onto the pew, her hands still trembling. He's a con artist, Elara. Liam insisted, his voice firmer now, trying to pull her away. Don't listen to him. But Elara couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the spot, trapped in this bizarre, horrifying tableau. She looked from the photograph to Caleb, searching his eyes, those storm-tossed eyes that held such an aching familiarity. There was no madness there, no con artist's gleam. There was only a deep, raw sorrow, an intensity that spoke of years of unanswered questions, of a painful, solitary quest. After they were taken, Caleb continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying with chilling clarity through the stunned church, we were separated. I don't know who took them or why, but I know you were given away, hidden, and I spent every waking moment since I was old enough to understand, looking for you, looking for answers, given away. The words echoed in Elara's mind, a fresh wave of nausea washing over her. Not a tragic accident, not simply an orphan, but given away, as if she were a burden, as if her existence was something to be erased, a secret to be kept. The official story, the one Maeve had meticulously maintained for 25 years, crumbled into dust. She felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness rise within her, protective of her parents' memory, protective of her own identity, which was now violently under siege. Who took them? She managed to ask, her voice a thin, reedy whisper, barely audible above the ringing in her ears. And why was I given away? Caleb's gaze hardened, a flicker of something close to anger flashing in his eyes. That's what we need to find out. But there's someone here who knows more than they're letting on. His eyes swept pointedly to Aunt Maeve, who whimpered, curling further into herself. She was there. She knew. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Elara stared at Maeve, a sickening realization blooming in her chest. Her kind, loving aunt, who had sacrificed so much to raise her, who had been her only family, her unwavering rock, could she have been complicit in this deception? Could she have kept such a monumental, soul-shattering secret from her for decades? The thought was a betrayal far deeper than any lie. It was a complete redefinition of her past, her present, and her very being. The dream of a perfect wedding, of a simple, happy future, evaporated like mist. In its place, a dark, twisting labyrinth appeared, leading into an unknown past filled with shadows and unimaginable truths. This wasn't just about a stranger claiming to be her brother. This was about the foundation of her entire life being ripped apart, piece by agonizing piece. The ceremony was over, though no vows had been exchanged. A new, terrifying journey had just begun, thrust upon her by a ghost from a past she never knew she had. The congregation remained frozen, silent witnesses to the dismantling of a life. And in the heart of it all, Elara stood, caught between the comforting lie she had lived and the terrifying truth that had just crashed into her world, brought by a man who looked so eerily like her, a man who called her sister. The church, once a sanctuary of joy, had transformed into a crucible of raw emotion. The stunned silence gave way to a cacophony of murmurs, whispers, and the insistent pleas of Liam trying to guide Elara away. But Elara remained rooted, her gaze fixed on Aunt Maeve, whose usual composed demeanor had shattered, revealing a fear so profound it was almost palpable. The air vibrated with unspoken accusations, with the weight of decades of deceit finally breaking through the surface. Caleb, sensing the delicate balance, stepped forward, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Maeve, it's time. Elara deserves to know. They deserve justice." Maeve finally looked up, her eyes, usually so gentle, now swimming with a mixture of terror and resignation. She whimpered, a sound like a wounded animal, and then, her voice barely a whisper, she choked out, "Not here. Please, not here." The officiant, a kind, elderly man named Father Michael, who had seen much in his long years but nothing quite like this, stepped in with a shaky but firm voice. "Perhaps we should all take a moment. The ceremony, it will need to be postponed." His words were a polite dismissal, an attempt to restore some semblance of order to the chaos. Liam, his face a mask of concern, gently took Elara's arm. "Come on, Elara. Let's go somewhere private. We'll figure this out." His steady presence was a lifeline, but her world was still spinning. How could she simply figure this out when her entire life had just been exposed as a carefully constructed lie? Caleb, however, wasn't letting go. He met Elara's gaze, his eyes intense. "I'll be at the old mill in room 207. We need to talk. All of us." He didn't wait for a response, merely gave a curt nod, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement to Elara, and then, as swiftly and mysteriously as he had appeared, he turned and walked out of the church, leaving a lingering chill in his wake. The remaining guests, still reeling, began to disperse, their hushed conversations filling the void. Elara felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a scene unfold from a great distance. Liam led her gently out of the church, past the wilting white roses and the discarded dreams of her perfect day. Aunt Maeve, still trembling, was helped out by one of the ushers, her distraught figure a stark contrast to the elegant wedding party. Back at the grand, old house Elara shared with Liam, the silence was deafening. The untouched wedding gifts, the lingering scent of hairspray and perfume from the morning's preparations, now felt like grotesque decorations in a morbid play. Liam tried to speak, to reassure her, but Elara held up a hand. Her mind was a whirlwind, grappling with the impossible. A twin brother, parents who hadn't died but were taken, and Maeve, her beloved aunt, implicated in it all. "I need to go," Elara said, her voice hollow, her gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the ornate chandelier. "I need to talk to him." Liam protested, his brow furrowed with worry. "Elara, he's a stranger. We don't know anything about him. This could be a setup, a cruel hoax. But what if it isn't? Elara countered, her voice gaining a fragile strength. What if everything I thought I knew is a lie? Maeve's reaction. It wasn't just shock, Liam. It was fear and guilt. She thought of the birthmark, the tiny detail that Caleb had pointed out, a mark she shared with the baby in the faded photograph. It was too specific, too personal to be a mere coincidence. Despite Liam's anxieties, Elara knew she had no choice. The gnawing emptiness that had always lurked at the edges of her consciousness, the unanswered questions about her parents, suddenly demanded resolution. This wasn't about her wedding anymore. It was about her identity, her very roots. They arrived at the Old Mill Inn, a charming, somewhat rustic establishment with creaking floorboards and the scent of old wood smoke. Room 207 was on the second floor. As Liam knocked, Elara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. Caleb opened the door. He was no longer the imposing, storm-like figure from the church. In the dim light of the room, he seemed almost vulnerable. His eyes, though still intense, held a deep weariness. He gestured them in, his gaze lingering on Elara for a moment, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher, longing, resignation. Inside, the room was Spartan. A single bed, a worn armchair, a small table cluttered with a laptop and various papers. On the table, prominently displayed, was a stack of identical faded photographs, the one he'd shown her of Eleanor holding the two infants. He picked one up, handing it to Elara. "I understand your skepticism," Caleb began, his voice surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to his earlier pronouncements. "But I wouldn't have risked everything to come here if it wasn't true. Our parents, David and Eleanor Vance, were archaeologists. They specialized in pre-Columbian artifacts, particularly those related to a lesser-known civilization in the Yucatan Peninsula." Elara frowned. Archaeologists. Her parents were artists, or so Maeve had always said. David, the painter, Eleanor, the sculptor. Another lie. Her head reeled. Caleb continued, his voice low and steady. "They disappeared during an expedition in the Yucatan when we were 5. The official story was that their small plane went down in a remote, unmapped jungle region. But I was there. I remember fragments. I remember the sounds, the panic, the faces. And I remember being separated from you." He spoke of being found by a small, isolated indigenous community, raised among them, learning their ways. He described a childhood of stark contrast to Elara's, a life rooted in the ancient rhythms of the jungle, far from the conveniences of modern society. He learned to track, to survive, driven by an unyielding need to understand his past, to find his family. He eventually made his way back to civilization, driven by the few fragmented memories he retained. A distinctive symbol on a pendant his mother wore, hushed conversations about a hidden discovery, and the undeniable image of a twin sister. "It took me years," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of that quest. "Years of dead ends, false leads, and countless dangers. I finally tracked down the coordinates of their last known expedition. And there, buried in the undergrowth, I found this." He reached under the table and pulled out a small, intricately carved stone tablet. It was dark, almost black, with ancient symbols etched into its surface, unlike anything Elara had ever seen. It radiated an eerie, almost primal energy. "This was what they found," Caleb explained, his finger tracing a complex pattern on the tablet. "It's a map, not to treasure as some might think, but to something far more significant, something that certain individuals would kill to possess." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "And it's what got our parents taken. Not a plane crash, Elara. Not an accident. They were targeted." Elara stared at the tablet, a cold dread creeping into her veins. Her parents, caught in something so dangerous, so clandestine? The artistic, gentle people of her fragmented memories transformed into adventurous archaeologists, victims of a sinister plot. It was a dizzying, terrifying shift in perspective. "Who?" Liam asked, his voice strained, his hand resting protectively on Elara's shoulder. "Who would want this?" Caleb's gaze hardened. A very powerful, very ruthless organization. They deal in ancient artifacts, but not for historical preservation. They seek power, and they'll eliminate anyone who stands in their way. He paused, then looked directly at Elara. And the only other person who knew where our parents were going, and who they were, was Maeve. Our parents entrusted you to her before they left for that final expedition. They told her to keep you safe, to keep you hidden, should anything happen to them. They wanted to protect you from this. And she did, Elara. She kept you hidden all these years, to protect you from the very people who took our parents. The words hit Elara like a physical blow. Maeve hadn't been complicit in their disappearance. She had been protecting her. Her aunt's terror, her guilt, suddenly made sense. It wasn't about lying to Elara. It was about keeping her alive. The truth, finally, was beginning to emerge, but it was a truth far more terrifying than any lie. It opened a Pandora's box of danger, suspicion, and a past she now realized she was inextricably linked to. Her wedding had been interrupted by a revelation, and now, that revelation was pulling her into a world she never knew existed. A world of ancient secrets and modern-day threats. The comfort of her mundane life was shattered, replaced by an unsettling, thrilling sense of a destiny she could no longer escape. The weight of Caleb's words settled over Elara, a chilling blanket woven from decades of secrets. The stone tablet, radiating an ancient, unsettling energy, lay on the small table between them like a silent, formidable witness. Liam stood beside Elara, his initial skepticism replaced by a profound understanding and a quiet, unyielding resolve. His hand found hers, a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. "So, what now?" Elara asked, her voice a tremor. The perfect wedding, the serene life she had meticulously built, now felt like a fragile, beautiful shell that had just been irrevocably cracked open. What is this something they found? And what do we do about them? Caleb's gaze hardened, a glint of the storm-tossed seas returning to his eyes. "This tablet," he began, gently tapping the ancient stone, "is more than a map. It's a key. Our parents discovered proof of a forgotten technology, not just artifacts. Something that could revolutionize energy or be weaponized beyond imagination. The organization that took them, they call themselves the Scythe of Kronos. They've been hunting this for centuries, systematically eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth. Our parents were brilliant, but they underestimated the ruthlessness of these people." He explained that the Scythe of Kronos operated in the shadows, a network of powerful individuals driven by greed and a twisted sense of control. They had infiltrators everywhere, in governments, in corporations, even in seemingly benign historical societies. Their motive wasn't just profit, but to monopolize this ancient power, to reshape the world as they saw fit. And Elara, as David and Eleanor's daughter, now became a potential target, a pawn in a game she hadn't known she was playing. "Maeve, she must have known the risks," Elara murmured, the pieces of her aunt's terrified reaction finally falling into place. "She chose to keep me safe, even if it meant lying to me my whole life. She made a terrible choice, Elara, but for the right reasons," Caleb confirmed, his voice softening slightly. "She was terrified they'd find you. Our parents left behind cryptic messages, hidden within their research, specifically for you, should this day ever come. They knew the Scythe would eventually piece together enough clues to find us. That's why I had to find you first." He pulled out a slim, leather-bound journal from beneath the laptop. Its pages were filled with meticulous drawings of ancient symbols, complex equations, and flowing script that Elara recognized as her mother's elegant handwriting. It was a testament to a life she never knew, a legacy of brilliance and danger. "This is their final research journal," Caleb explained. "It contains everything. The full translation of the tablet, their theories, and a coded message about the true location of the technology. But it's incomplete. There's a missing piece. A final key that our mother designed to unlock the last layer of the cipher. And from what I've gathered, Maeve knows where it is." The revelation shifted the weight of the moment. The focus moved from the trauma of the past to the urgency of the present. They needed to find Maeve. not just for answers, but for the missing key, for the final piece of her parents' desperate puzzle. "She's at the hospital," Liam interjected, having discreetly made a call while Caleb was explaining. The shock was too much for her. She collapsed after leaving the church. A pang of guilt, sharp and immediate, pierced through Elara. Her aunt, frail and alone, now hospitalized because of the truth she had kept hidden for so long. The urgency became even more profound. They raced to the hospital, the old mill inn and its revelations fading into the background, replaced by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the hushed tones of a medical facility. Maeve lay pale against the white sheets, and 4 drip in her arm. Her eyes fluttered open as Elara approached, a flicker of fear, then a wave of profound relief washing over her face. "Elara, my darling," Maeve whispered, her voice weak. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to protect you. They were coming for them. They would have come for you too." Elara took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know, Maeve. Caleb told me. You did what you thought was right. But we need your help now. There's a missing piece. Something Mom left for me. Do you know where it is?" Maeve's eyes, though still weary, held a spark of determination. She nodded weakly. "Your mother. She was so clever. She knew they might try to silence her. It's in your wedding necklace. The locket. She wanted it to be something beautiful. Something you'd always wear, always keep close." Elara gasped. The intricate silver locket, a family heirloom Maeve had given her just weeks before the wedding, nestled against her collarbone. She had worn it every day since, a symbol of continuity, of family. She had always thought it was just decorative. Now she realized it held a deeper, far more significant purpose. Carefully, Elara unclasped the necklace. The locket was old, its surface worn smooth by time. She had never noticed anything unusual about it. But as she examined it closely, her fingers tracing the delicate etchings, she felt a subtle ridge, a tiny, almost invisible seam on the side. With a trembling hand, she pressed. The locket clicked open, revealing not a miniature photograph, but a minuscule, intricately folded piece of parchment. Inside, barely visible without a magnifying glass, was a sequence of symbols, mirroring those on the stone tablet, but with an additional, unique set of characters. It was undeniably the missing key, the final piece. Caleb leaned closer, his eyes widening as he recognized the script. "This is it, the complete cipher. Now we can access the full journal, the true location, and finally, the answers about what happened to Mom and Dad." The weight lifted from Elara's shoulders, replaced by a surge of purpose. Her life, once defined by quiet routines and artistic pursuits, had irrevocably shifted. The past was no longer a vague, painful memory, but a living, breathing entity, full of danger and discovery. She had a brother, a secret history, and a destiny intricately woven with an ancient mystery. The perfect wedding may have been shattered, but in its place, a far more compelling and terrifying adventure had just begun. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a relentless quest for truth and justice. Elara, once merely a curator of art, was now a guardian of a legacy, ready to step into the shadows and confront the truth, no matter how dangerous. Liam, her steady partner, stood by her side, his unwavering support a testament to a bond forged in crisis. And Caleb, her long-lost twin, was a mirror reflecting a strength and determination she never knew she possessed. The world was a far more complex, perilous place than she had ever imagined, but she was no longer alone in it. And that brings us to the end of this thrilling, emotional journey. What a story, right? A wedding day turned into an uncovering of family secrets and a dangerous past. If this tale of hidden truths and unexpected destinies captivated you as much as it did me, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on the next incredible narrative we uncover together. Your support helps us bring these compelling tales to life.